Hey guys, welcome to this week's podcast episode for the Financial Freedom Podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Christopher Liu. And as you know, I'm always love connecting, networking with individuals, people on the cutting edge, getting their insights, sharing that wisdom with the audience. And today I'm happy to introduce John Largent, and he's going to talk to us all about podcast production through his company. He's spoken at numerous high-profile events, PodFest, about podcasting, and I'm really excited to talk about podcasting. You know, it's a really nascent technology, it has a lot of potential. So, John, welcome.
Thank you so much, Dr. Chris. It's great to be here.
Yeah, I know. It's interesting. We were talking backstage, and we had connected through a mutual connection. And you've spoken on several high-profile events. So I'm happy to get guests of your caliber on my show. So tell everybody about your story, and we'll get into it.
Yeah, so thank you again. It's a pleasure to be here. So I started podcasting actually in 2007, which is really when the industry started taking off. But my background is as a healthcare administrator. I did that for 28 years, and really wanted to. Much like yourself, I wanted to change directions and do some things that really interested me. And like a lot of people that started, especially back then, I started podcasting in a closet, and it was an interesting thing because I spoke to my wife and I told her what I wanted to do, that I wanted to switch careers, and she said, well, what do you like? And I said, I like sports, I like food, I like, healthcare, obviously. And she's like, well, if you can find a way to make money doing that, then you go for it. And so I did, and started a little sports podcast, and it caught on and got a lot of attention and got some sponsors. And it really shift completely for me. And then some of my friends started asking, well, hey, can you tell us what this podcast thing is? And could you help me start it? And so that just lit a light bulb in my head that, hey, I could create a podcast agency that helps people in different industries to start their own podcast. So that's what I did.
Yeah, I love that. I love talking to people early on. And what's interesting is you said you started podcasting in your closet. Was that because I was, during the pandemic, I was podcasting in my closet because everybody was stuck at home, so I didn't have anywhere else to go. You talk about 3 reasons not to start and 3 reasons to start immediately. Tell us more about that.
Yeah, I think that it's kind of a bait and switch title, because I really want people to podcast, but I only want them to do it if they are committed. And you know this, but the 3 reasons that I tell people not to start a podcast is: don't start a podcast if you don't have time. If you're going to just put a microphone to your face and start talking, that's great. You can be a hobbyist. But if you really want to be successful, you need to have the time. And that time could be 2 to 5 hours a week. If you're going to record, if you're going to learn to edit, if you don't know how to edit, if you're going to learn to put it out on distribution platforms, if you're going to create the repurposing on YouTube and other places, it just takes time. So I tell people, don't start if you're not going to take time. The other one is, don't start a podcast if you're not willing to do some research. If you're going to have quality guests on, or if you're having a podcast where you're just doing all the talking yourself, have some knowledge and be authentic about it, because people can smell inauthenticity. I think that's a word. And so they want to make sure that they're listening to somebody that has some authority on the topic they're talking about, or they have a passion for it. And the third thing I say is, do not start a podcast if you don't have patience. And that's one of the big things. A term that's used in the industry is pod fade. And it's basically, you do 2 or 3 episodes, you don't have 1 million listeners, you're not the next Joe Rogan, and so I give up. And so those are the 3 things that I tell people why they shouldn't start a podcast. But it's really all in a way to motivate them to understand what the commitment is to actually start one.
Yeah, I love that. Like I said, take the long approach. You have short-term strategy, then you have long-term strategy, longevity. You talked about pod fading. So one thing is talking about, so basically since I think podcasting kind of hit mainstream like 2019, but you started way before that. And then so you talk about facts over fiction and the unfiltered truth of starting a podcast. I'm really curious about that.
Yeah, as an agency, we want to make sure that a podcast is going to deliver what you want it to. And whether that's to build a brand, whether that's to create an education platform for something you're working on, whether you are looking to just entertain, those are all valid reasons to start a podcast. Each one of those has their own specific needs from you as the host to be able to practice, get better. Because I'll be honest with you, my first podcast was not great. You can tell I've got a twang in my voice. And I'm from Southeast Texas, not too far from where you are now, but out kind of in the country a bit. And I really worked on my accent and things like that. And I learned at one of these conferences, don't do that. Don't be inauthentic. If that's how you sound, that's how you sound. And people will either like it or not like it, but don't change who you are. And so from a perspective, creating your podcast, it's so important that you enjoy the topic that you're talking about, and that the love of the content is the first thing that it comes to mind. The monetization, speaking, the other things that you may be interested in will come later, because it will shine through that the content you're creating is valuable to listeners, and it's something that they want to listen to and hopefully subscribe to and listen to every week.
I love that. And again, this is talking about the long-term approach. So, for these audience out there, they want to start a podcast. Hopefully they don't get pod fade, but what are 7 success steps for podcasting success, and kind of words of inspiration, wisdom when they get in and they just push through and get through it?
Yeah, I think the one thing we teach, and when we coach some of our clients, is that you have to think of your podcasting as a 3-legged stool. Right? So the 3 legs of the stool are: know your audience. That's the first one. Be authentic. That's the second leg. And the third one is be consistent. And I can tell you a number of stories about the last one, especially because when you make a connection with an audience, they expect to hear you on a weekly basis, or whatever that interval is, that frequency that you're doing your show. And so I'll give you a good example. We have a client that's a well-known plastic surgeon. He's got a really popular show, and his show comes out every Wednesday at 10 a.m. in the morning Pacific time, noon Central time. And for some reason, when we loaded it into the system, the scheduling software didn't work for whatever reason, or it could have been human error, but the show didn't come out at 10. And we started getting texts. We started getting social media. Hey, where's the show? Hey, is the doc okay? It was just really, because they have a personal connection, and they wanted to make sure that they may not listen to the show, but they get a note, a message on their phones that say, hey, there's a new episode out now. And so that gives them the peace of mind. Hey, everything's good in the world. But when it doesn't happen and they look on their phone and they see, hey, this episode hasn't come out, they feel personally involved, because you do have that intimate connection. So again, those things, knowing your audience, being authentic, and being consistent, are the 3 foundational tools of having a successful podcast. And the other things I would say are some of the things we already talked about. I mean, be patient with yourself. You don't go from not doing any kind of media to working for Netflix or CBS, CNN, or whoever it is. You take baby steps, and it's going to take time for you to grow that real audience and connect with people so that they can then share with others. And that's when it really, just like podcasting really took off, I think your personal podcast can really take off. It's that hockey stick graph that you look at where you kind of, you have consistent listeners, but there may be not a lot of them. And then all of a sudden, for some reason, those people have shared your information and your podcast with their friends, their families, other people at work, and the success takes off, but it takes patience to get there.
Yeah, it's all patience. And like I said, you talk about, we'll talk a little bit about learning a new profession by, keeping your current job because people still have bills to pay. But how can people get their podcasts to stand out, kind of give that when they're first starting out?
Yeah, that's a great question. And one of the things that we teach people, and it's easy to do, but get them involved from the get-go. First of all, have that first episode that tells them about you, tells them not about the show, but just this is me, this is who I am, and this is why we're going to have this conversation. And we're going to have a conversation, which means I'm not going to do all the talking. I want to hear from you. So the sooner you can engage with them, and that can be something like on your social media, you can put a poll up every week. Hey, I want to talk about one of these 3 subjects. Which one do you want to hear about this week? And actually listen, watch the poll numbers, have it for a specific amount of time, and then announce this is what we're going to talk about before you have the episode. And then they really feel like, okay, he's listening. He's legitimate. He's going to listen to our suggestions and engage with us. And I really like that. So I'm going to invest my time, whether it's driving or working out or whatever you're doing, to listening to this podcast. That's one of the main things, is start from the get-go, get your audience. Even if it's 5 people starting, get those folks involved and have them craft the direction your podcast is going to go, because the audience will always tell you what they want to hear.
And for those people that are, I see this quite often on social media, is like, people want to start a podcast, but then they have their current job. Podcasting takes time. It may not replace, can supplement, but how do they carve out that time learning the profession, kind of learning the skills while keeping their current job?
The thing that I did initially, I found a niche time every Saturday morning early where the kids and my wife were still asleep and I could focus and it could be quiet, and would just commit that time on my calendar. That is so important. You have to treat it like any other have to do in your life. You have to put it on a calendar. You have to give it a time, and you have to commit to that. So every Saturday at 4 a.m., I was up doing a podcast. Would I have rather been sleeping? Yes, but it was important to me to get started with this podcast. And I found out that made every other aspect of my daily routine was unaffected. And it was up to me to do those things and to create that. And as far as learning the craft, there are tons, and I would suggest there are tons of ways, going on to YouTube and just asking how to start a podcast. You're going to get 100 different versions of it, but you can take pieces from each one of them that fit you, your lifestyle, what you're wanting to do, what your budget is to buy a microphone or a laptop or whatever it is you need to do. And you can take little pieces from each one of those to start. And I encourage people to do that. But it takes, even with starting, it takes some research and homework to get it right.
We talked about the time part, and then, how much, for example, for low budget versus mid to high, how much money does it cost to start? Is it really expensive? People are wondering.
It can be expensive. When I first started, I didn't know what I was doing, so I had all this equipment in there in the closet with me, and now you can literally start a podcast on your phone. There are apps out there like Anchor that you can start, edit, and distribute your podcast from a phone. And the technology in our phones these days creates pretty good audio quality. If you want to be more engaged and have a more long-term commitment, then yes, there are different tiers, and you can start a really nice podcast with a USB microphone for $100. So it just kind of depends on what you want to do. And if you're in the case of us, where we started with nothing, bought a bunch of equipment we now use as doorstops and things because the technology's gotten so much better. But you can get I've got multiple monitors here in my studio, and I've got a couple of clocks and things that help manage my time when I'm hosting and not necessarily a guest. So you can really become elaborate and just learn. Again, there are so many different ways and what you want to get out of it. I know we never really considered video, but now since pandemic, we like, okay, we're going to commit our podcast to creating a video aspect of it as well. So I have lights in here, and we try to accommodate guests that we can then use for other platforms. And so it's an ongoing evolution of what you want your podcast to be.
Yeah, I love that. Because when I first started out, it was just audio, and then I had a thumbnail, and then as video came, and then it was like you can put on the YouTube and you can create blog posts out of it. As we come to the kind of the closing, two more questions is one is how do people, once their podcast gets, can drive pretty good income, and then to go all in, what do you say about people that have that fear, that taking that leap from, say comfort and safety to entrepreneurship? What do you say to them?
Yeah, you have to bank on yourself. I left a 6-figure job, just cold turkey. I gave them a lot of notice. I gave them like 6 months notice, but I said, on this date, I'm quitting and I'm starting to do this. And they didn't take me that seriously at first. And then when they saw that I was leaving, they understood. But I just, I'm not one of these people to be foolish or to take big risks. But I had done enough homework on the industry to think, okay, I can do this. And the only way I can do it is to be unwavering in my commitment to myself, to the clients that I'm trying to get with, and to the process. And that's the beautiful thing about being an entrepreneur is you can, nowadays especially, you can ease into it, start part-time, start to build some revenue. And then when those revenues kind of even out between your 9 to 5 and what you want to do with podcasting, then you can make a decision. I probably didn't make the wisest decision by just stopping cold turkey because our income disappeared, but long term it paid off. And I would say if you're very and confidence is one of those things that a lot of people, that keeps them, the fear, the unknown, and that excites me. I love the unknown. So it's always one of those things where I want to bet on myself and bet that I can create something that other people will want to consume or become a part of. That's not something you can necessarily teach, but it's one of those things that you can coach people to take that chance and take that risk on themselves and really be confident in what they're doing, even if they don't know exactly all the steps at the time.
Yeah. Speaking of, you help coach content creation for new podcasts. How can people reach out to you, contact you, check out your social medias, and work with you?
Yeah, thank you. Social media is Game Day on Instagram, and our website is Game on the World Wide Web. So we've got a contact page there. You can see some of our work that we've done, and if we can help you, we're happy to do it. Even if you want to talk about some ideas, I'm happy to hop on the phone and share anything I can with you.
Yeah, and for all the audience out there, let's thank John for coming onto this podcast, early adopter and pioneer in podcasting. Be sure to, all of his resources will be in the links and show notes. And thanks for a fantastic discussion.
Thank you, Dr. Chris. It's a pleasure to be here.